So this talk is basically a distillation of what I am seeing in the market, based on the fact that at Hustle Badger we've now trained hundreds of people on different AI tools. So we've got a bunch of different courses, which cover AI prototyping tools. They cover agent building platforms. They cover general AI programs as well. And not to get into too much there, but to be able to teach those courses, we firstly had to map out the market and see what people are actually using these tools for. But then we've understood kind of like how people are using these tools and what they want to get out of them. So this is almost the kind of like highlights from these courses. And what I'm going to be doing is talking through both the different classes of tools that I see, and also kind of some practical tips for getting the most out of those classes of tools. Um, so that is what the talk. I'm gonna go through. I probably talk for at least 45 minutes. If I get distracted, it might be a bit longer. Um, but it's going to be awesome. And I'll answer questions and say as I go along or at the end if I don't have a chance. So, I mean, if you haven't noticed, like, it's a great time to build stuff. Like, I'm assuming like a lot of people here are kind of product managers or product related. And if you got into that because you like building things, you can build stuff like really cool stuff on your own really quickly. And a few examples here, a couple on the left, that people built on our Build with AI course. These are things that they've kind of built in Lovable, a lot of them, or Figma Make, or something like that, a prototyping tool. Top one is a personalized job search platform. So this was effectively scraping the internet for new jobs. It was then helping them pull together a customized cover letter and CV, and then apply for that job really quickly, and all in like a custom interface. The bottom one with a kind of cool map on it, this is someone who was a sailor as well, and they wanted to help plan their routes between different anchorages. So this allows them to put in their location and where they want to go, and then the tool provides them with feedback on when is the best time to make that journey based on the weather conditions, the weather forecast, the tide timetables, the distance, everything like that. Um, and people are building these with a week or two's kind of experience of using the tools. These are things that you can churn out like very, very quickly, so you don't need to kind of get too much experience. The other thing, this one on the right, this is you can see it's a skill that I'm running in Claude, so I'm running it with a keyword contact lookup. This helps me kind of manage my pipeline. So you can see what it does is it basically pulls me a summary of who the person is that I'm speaking to. It pulls like every touch point that we've had, and kind of beyond the fold, it goes on and kind of tells me like where we are in the conversation and what I need to tell them about next. Am I due to send them a proposal? Do I need to schedule a call with them? And so this is just really, really helpful for me, who is like not naturally a salesperson. I'm naturally a product person, and helps me kind of keep on top of all that kind of side of things. And so there's just like almost any direction you want to go in, you can build tech to help you out. And I'll talk more about both the kind of prototypes and internal tools side of things as we go on. So when I think about tools, I try and put them in categories, because if you think tool by tool, it's all like there's just like too many of them. Whereas if you think about categories, you can actually categorize tools into like quite a small number of buckets, and um, there's not a lot of difference within those buckets, if I'm honest. So the three buckets that I now think about are AI chatbots. So these are your general purpose tools where you ask a question, you get an answer. Things like ChatGPT, Claude on the web, Gemini. These are all in browser apps. So you don't download anything, you just kind of open up your browser window and ask them. The second category I think about is agent building platforms. So these are tools where you can build your own AI agents or AI powered workflows. They have drag and drop components, so those workflows are really easy to kind of pull together, but they work through other tools. So you generally don't create your own interface here, but they will work when you get an email in that will trigger a workflow, or when you update a column in a spreadsheet, that will trigger a workflow. So they allow you to kind of connect different tools together in kind of cool ways. And the third way I think about a third class of tool is local agents. So these are things called like Claude Code, Cursor, Anti-Gravity, Codex. So this is where you download an app and you have a local harness that is connected to a foundational model, that can edit local files, that can write code locally. And this is where I think the future of knowledge work is going. So a kind of notable omission from these categories are prototyping tools like Lovable, Figma Make, V0, Replit, all that kind of class of things. I did have that as a fourth kind of class until 3, 4 months ago. I've left it off partly because all of the tips that I'm going to give you that I would give you from that class will either be in um, the stuff on AI chatbots or local agents, but also um, because I am using them less and less myself. And this is also what I'm hearing from other people is that actually, as Claude Desktop and Codex get more and more approachable and people get more comfortable with using them, they're actually using the prototyping tools less and they're just going directly to a local agent. And there's definitely a trend of even the two classes that we've got here, so chatbots and agent building platforms, sort of getting a little bit eaten up by local agents, which seem to be where everything is going, at least at the moment. And I'd say there's nothing preventing there being like another class emerging quite quickly, and quite soon. I think we are still very early in the AI transition. So um, within all of these, I think it's worth bearing in mind that they basically all run on the same technology. They all are powered by foundational models, and there are specialist models for images and things like that. But your basic foundational models. So GPT 5.5, Opus 4.8, Gemini, whatever it is. Um, they're basically text processors. So whatever you are sticking into them, whether that is a user prompt, a skill, a local file, a Claude MD file, that is converted into plain text. So strings of characters. Those strings of characters are then converted into tokens, which are just arrays of numbers, and that gets sent to the foundational model. And then the foundational model sends it back, right? So it sends back some tokens, which are then converted to plain text and then converted into a response in the user window, or it's converted into another file. So this is why foundational models love very simple file formats like Markdown, CSV, JSON, because they are just, the data is right there. There's not a lot of special characters or encoding or formatting. And it's why they're so good at coding, because computer code in Python or JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever is basically just it's strings of characters. Um, so yeah, worth kind of thinking about that. And regardless of where you're having your conversation, again, like whichever of these categories you're thinking about, and again, if you're using AI prototyping tools, it's the same thing, right? They're all based off foundational models. Um, whenever you have a conversation, everything goes into the context window. So there are not kind of like separate buckets for working with skills or files or the conversation you're having. All of it goes into the context window. And if you're connecting tools, MCPs, actually what you're doing is you're putting documentation into the context window that says, hey, if you like, I, as the harness, can make an API call to these tools, and this is how I can make that API call. You just need to tell me what you want to do. So if you're not familiar with some of these things, Claude MD files or instructions are, they're effectively like it's a saved prompt that you put into every conversation that you have with a foundational model. So that you want to keep quite lean, quite light, but it's worth putting in things like who you are, any kind of principles or values that you have, and if you're working locally, a kind of index that points to where the harness can find different bits of information. Skills are saved prompts, right? So that are called either by you explicitly when you say, "Hey, can you use this skill?" or when the kind of harness thinks that it's a good idea, and then local files and conversation are kind of fairly self-evident. When we talk about a harness, like a harness is just like what is processing kind of the foundational model requests. So the easiest way to think about how you as a user speak with the foundational model, which is kind of like the brains of AI, is through one of these AI chatbots. It's just a very simple web interface where you put in some text and then it sends an API call to a foundational model, gets it back and converts it back into text, which you can then read. So this is like the simplest interaction that you can have. Um, when you're using an agent building platform, um, again, what you're doing is very similar to what you'd be doing if you were building like a Zapier workflow or kind of like any workflow in a kind of like SaaS product, where you define a series of steps, and each step you are getting information, you're processing information, you're outputting information, but some of those steps can be um, calls to foundational models, and that could be to OpenAI foundational models or Anthropic OpenAI models. It doesn't really matter. So what these tools like NAN and Zapier and Gumloop allow you to do is kind of drag and drop all these different steps into place to create your own workflows, which is super powerful. I'm going to go deeper into this, how this works a little bit later. So if you have questions. Local agents, then you can see they're quite similar to the AI chatbots. This desktop app, also called like a harness, is basically a very lightweight shell that can then do things on behalf of the foundational model. So partly because it is local, then it has access to all your local files, so it can read stuff on your computer, which means that it can use those local files for memory, for context, which means that pretty much straight out the box, they tend to give better answers than AI chatbots do. Um, but you can also give them, instructions, so Claude ND file, or you can just input kind of like standing instructions that they will always bear in mind. And yeah, you can connect them to other apps. So as I said, that what that basically means when you connect Claude Desktop to your calendar, that's basically saying, hey, this is the API call you can make to my calendar, and here's the permission to do it. And then when you say, you as the user give a message to the desktop app and say, like, can you look at my calendar and see what meetings I've got with, Dave in the next week? The foundational model is then getting a message saying, like, here's the tool documentation. The user wants to speak to, see what the meetings are with Dave. What should I do? And the foundational model goes back, sends a message back to the desktop app and says, make this API call using this tool with these parameters. The desktop app does it, gets all the information back, sends it back to the foundational model to process it, and then gives you, and kind of that's how the conversation continues. So it's just all text. It's all text. It's all foundational models. It's all the same context window. And as soon as you realize that, you realize that anything you learn about prompting or how these models work in one platform is applicable to how you use all of the others. There's no kind of specific techniques really for AI chatbots or local agents or prototyping tools. They all work in the same way. Let's talk about AI chatbots in more detail, though, and by which I mean let's talk about kind of like basic interactions with LLMs, with foundational models. Um, so you know, they're great, right? In the sense that they know everything. They are trained on, the whole online, body of human knowledge. But that means if you don't give them any context, you're going to get very, very beige answers because they're just going to give you like the average of everything. And the average of everything is kind of beige and boring. But if you give them the right context, and the right kind of objectives, they're going to be super, super smart. And so it's all getting good results out of these is all about giving them the right context. Um, or rather, giving them the right context. And then also what I found is working step by step. So working step by step is really important as well because it means when you give them a task, you get a chance to kind of course correct as you go deeper into that task. And you not only make the LLMs think more deeply about how they're going to do things, but you also then course correct as you go through those steps, which means you get much more aligned output to what you want at the end of it. I give you some examples of both working step by step, but also easy ways to get more context into an LLM. So, firstly, if you haven't used voice mode, go and use voice mode. And there are a few different ways you can do that, right? So, you can just very simply click the little microphone button that you will see on any AI product these days and just start talking. You can also, whether you're on a Mac or a Windows machine, you can also go into your system settings and you can reconfigure a hotkey to dictate for you so that for me, I hold down the function key, I just start speaking, and that automatically transcribes what I'm saying and pastes it into wherever my cursor is. Um, Third way, you can use Super Whisper. And I really recommend Super Whisper because the reason it's better for me is it basically uses a little LLM to process that raw dictation and take out all the ums and ahs and put in like formatting. So it just makes the output that much better. And the free tier is great. So a few different ways you can do that. But this is really, really amazing for getting context into chatbots and because you can speak faster than you can write, but also you don't need to sort of self edit before you hit, return. You can kind of stream of consciousness, give some rambles, and LLMs are really, really good at pulling stuff out. This example is actually I was having a chat with my mum, who is in her 70s, and ChatGPT at the same time. So ChatGPT was coming back with content, and my mum was saying like, "Oh, what I like about this is X, Y, Z," and I just held down the dictation button so that her input went into the computer. And it was great. Um, the second thing you can do is use images and screenshots, and I use this all the time. If I want to give a reference for something, if I want to problem solve something, I just screenshot it, shot it, and then drop it into the chat window. So this is an example where I was actually using an agent building platform, which we'll talk about in just a moment. I was trying to set up the Spotify API and it just wasn't working. So I took a screenshot of exactly what I could see, which was this kind of fairly technical and boring box with a load of settings in it, dropped it into ChatGPT and asked it what was going wrong. And it spotted from the screenshot that I had a typo in client credentials. So um, I think like maybe I can even put it down. So like this thing here should be in the plural rather than in the singular. And it spotted that and told me how to fix it. So stuff like that is like really, really uh good for helping you kind of fix stuff. Oh, I could have just waited for my animations there. That might have been easier. Anyway. Um, I see, Simon, you're asking about Claude Code. I'm going to talk about different approaches for installing it in a little bit later. Um, and the dictation one, the Super Whisper, actually, I think I use Whisper Flow. I mean, there's a few. Um, they're all basically the same. Okay, what else can you do? You can use files. So this works really well in local agents where the files are already on your machine, but you can also do this for chatbots on the web where you can either just drag files into the chat window or you can set up projects. And so here you can see I've got a little test project where I've uploaded some documents, my tone of voice, some signs of AI writing, um, a list of LinkedIn posts that I've written, a LinkedIn post deconstructor guidelines, and I've then asked it something like very, very basic, what should I post about today without much context? And it's coming back with, you know, not horrible suggestions for what I should post. So this is again, because you need to give LLMs context for them to give you good suggestions back, if actually you can just write that down somewhere and then make sure that they've got it all the time or they've got it on demand, it saves you a huge amount of time. And inevitably, you put in a little bit more effort than if you didn't write it down somewhere. And that also means you just kind of give them better inputs to the LLM. So that's well worth doing it as well. A way of getting those written down inputs, if you don't have them to hand, is to get the LLMs to do the work for you. So a couple of techniques that I use quite often is I will get the LLM to do its own research. So um, prior to switching over to Claude Code, when I was using ChatGPT in a browser a lot more, I'd often just ask it as the first question, what do you know about Hustle Badger? Because I then didn't have to explain, who my target audience was, what our product portfolio was, what our price points were. It would just come up with a like, well, Hustle Badger does blah, 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 training for PMs and on AI. I was like, great, okay, we're going to write, a piece of content for Hustle Badger, or great, I want to create an image for Hustle Badger. So it's just a way of kind of priming the conversation. Uh, and if it's not something you already know about, this is also really good for kind of educating you about the options as well. The other technique I use a lot is getting it to interview me. So I say, hey, I've got this rough idea, ramble, ramble, ask me 5 questions to clarify what I'm talking about here. Or ask me 5 questions about this idea so you can write up a spec. Um, the only thing you need to be careful about here is that LLMs will almost default to asking questions. You may have noticed this already. It's an engagement tactic to kind of get you to spend more time using them. So they will ask you like 100 questions if you let them. So don't do that. Like either limit them explicitly in the number of questions or just keep an eye on the time and only give them sort of like 2 or 3 minutes of interview time. That's all you generally need. But it's super effective because they're coming from a neutral standpoint. They often ask questions which are really obvious, like to kind of just, make trade-offs on the side your approach, but actually you haven't even thought about articulating because you've overlooked them. Um, so there's kind of some ways of getting context into LLMs really quickly. Let's talk a little bit deeper then about this kind of like working step-by-step method that I was kind of talking about. So if I am doing something complicated, something I haven't done before, if I effectively don't really know how I want to tackle something, this is the approach that I use. And you can kind of scale this depending on how complex the task is. You don't have to use this every single time that you use an LLM, but this is like the most heavyweight approach that I use. So the first thing I do is I brief the LLM on what I'm doing. So I will tell it what is the problem. I'll give it any references I have seen. Those might be visuals, they might be files, they might be like research docs. I will tell it if I've got any ideas about how I think the solution might look like or approaches we might take. But if I do that, I will also just be really clear that I'm not clear, I am not sure that is the right approach. And what I want it to do is to research around the problem and find out more details. And I want it to ask me questions if there's any ambiguity about what I'm talking about to help clarify the problem space. Then what I'm getting back from the LLM is 2 to 3 options generally about what are the high level approaches we can take and what are the trade-offs between using them. And the nice thing about this is this kind of works even if you're talking about stuff that you have no domain knowledge about, because you can always ask the LLM to sort of translate the different approaches into trade-offs that you understand. So, it's saying like, hey, you want to do this kind of marketing? You're like, okay, great, but which of these is more effective, or which of these is, higher reach or higher conversion, or faster to do, or the same if you're doing something, technical on the coding side. So once you've kind of established like what are the trade-offs, what's the approach you want to take, you can then provide it with feedback and get a plan. So that plan is then a kind of like generally high level, right? You need to do these 10 things, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Here, what I found is like LLMs will tend to be like, you need to do this, and then tell me what you see, and then you need to do that, and then like give me some input here. And it will tend to kind of like over deliver in terms of what that plan looks like. So what I usually do is basically ask them to just give me the steps and let's talk through what the high level plan is. And then we work through each step one by one. But you get an you want to have like an overview of what is the plan and provide feedback there, then you can kind of move on to this final step, which is like, okay, then you start working through these and you ask for detailed guidance on like how to complete each step. So this process, as I say, I found incredibly flexible and powerful. Um, and this I basically do with voice. Certainly the briefing bit I do with voice, and then depends kind of like how many comments I have going forwards on that. Okay, that was chatbots and general LLM use. Let's talk a little bit about agent building platforms. So these are things, say like Zapier, N8N, Gumloop, Make.com, Relay, which is probably my favorite because it's really simple. But these allow you to create, automations through to kind of fairly sophisticated agents. What really helped me understand what you could do here was thinking about this on this kind of spectrum where you've got deterministic logic on one side, on this left-hand side, and probabilistic software on the right-hand side. So left-hand side, deterministic software. Let's imagine, it's pre-2022, ChatGPT has not even been released yet. Um, Almost everything you're going to build is going to be deterministic, if this, then that style of logic. So, example, you have a lead capture form on your website. Someone fills it in and says, hey, my name is Ed Biden. Here's my email address. I'd like to have a call, please. You take all those field inputs, you stick them into your CRM, and then your CRM triggers an email to them where it just has a kind of, hey, first name, and you switch out the first name dynamic tag for whatever they've put into the lead form. Right. Fairly basic. It's okay. It gets the job done in lots of different situations. And that is how most software is built, right? Most software is deterministic logic. What LMs have allowed us to do is to have this what what I call an agentic workflow. So you still have a linear flow, but you can do then some quite cool things in that flow using LLMs. So, for example, you still have the same new lead form, but then before you put details into your CRM, you go and research them on the internet and you find out what company they're from and what the size of that company and how many employees they have and all this sort of stuff and like they build. And then you can really enrich your CRM details. And then you can write a truly personalized email that is based on the research. And then you can send them an email. So you've got quite narrow kind of guidelines for what your LLM is going to do in each of these cases. But you're getting much stronger output at the end. The third thing you can do is then build, what I'd call like a true agent, right? So a true agent is where you have sort of a linear flow to start with, like a new lead comes in, but what that is going to do is it's going to trigger an LLM step where effectively you're asking a foundational model, what should I do next? Should I go and use one of these tools? And like, here's some tools you could use. And the foundational model decides whether it's going to call those tools. You're going to rely on probably some static context, like files and instructions that say, hey, in this case, you should do that, and this is like the playbook for doing X, Y, Z. And then once the AI agent has kind of decided what it's going to do, then it can trigger lots of different actions. So these are very, very powerful bits of software that have nonlinear flows because there is so much variability in what they can do. The answers that you can get out of them, could be great or could be kind of not great. And that is the trick with them, right? With deterministic software, you put in the same inputs, you always get the same outputs. So getting the quality you want is very, very easy. On the right hand side over here with your agents, you put in the same inputs, you can get wildly different outputs. And that makes it quite difficult to make sure you actually get something that's usable. But that is where we use evals, which I will talk about in just a moment. So on this kind of like agent spectrum, this is an agentic workflow, right? I mean, and all of these things work in the same way, basically, right? So they have a trigger which starts the automation. So that might be on a schedule, every Friday at 8 a.m. It might be when something happens in another tool. So in this case, something happens in Google Calendar 4 hours before the meeting, start this workflow. Great. And then you just have a bunch of steps that happen one after the other. And that could include delays or loops or if else logic and things like that. And it may also include, as I say, kind of calls to foundational models. So what this automation does is, in fact, I got this on a blank slide. This is quite a simple agentic flow. Every time there's a meeting in my calendar, 4 hours before that meeting, it firstly looks up all the guests in the meeting. It skips any internal guests, but for any external guest, it will look up the emails we've sent. It will look up any recent meetings they've been in. It will look up their LinkedIn profile. And then on the basis of that, it will send me a briefing summary of who I'm going to meet and email it to me. That means anytime I have a meeting with an external person, I always have at the top of my inbox a briefing on who I'm meeting and why I'm meeting them. So again, this is quite a simple automation. It's super, super powerful for me. When I'm meeting probably like 10, 15 people every week on different calls, and I have to remember what is the context for that individual call. You can make these much more complicated, right? So this is now in NAN, and you can see, there's branching logic, there's loops here, there's like agents that are doing different things, and I haven't even given these agents like different tools, right? So you can kind of combine all these basic steps in quite complicated way and make this as complicated as you want. It's still the same underlying, there's a trigger, there's some steps. Some of those steps are routing logic. Some of those steps are processing information. Some of those steps are foundational models. If you build something where you need to have great output, you're going to want to have evals. And the way to think about evals are as QA for probabilistic systems. So QA, quality assurance in traditional software. So that ensures that what you built does what you intended it to do. You put in a certain input, you get out a certain output. For these probabilistic systems, again, you're going to get some natural variation where you put in the same input multiple times and you will get different outputs. What evals allow you to do is say like, hey, I want to make this system better. And as I make changes to the system, which I think will improve the outputs, I want to be sure that the outputs are indeed getting better, and that's not just random variation. You can use this whether you are building skills in Claude, you've got a prompt library, whether you're building production grade AI agents. It's all effectively the same system. And again, you just kind of scale it to what is the level that makes sense for you. So the process for evals, and this is going to be quite high level, but I think that's still useful given the time we've got. So the way that it works is you have a bunch of test cases for your agent. So you can see all my test cases over here. User query. This is for a travel agent, a travel itinerary agent. Plan a romantic weekend in Paris for two. I'm taking my kids to the Swiss Alps for a week. So these are all test cases that I want my agent to be able to respond to. And ideally, I kind of generate these test cases, or I capture these test cases to capture the full kind of breadth of things that people might ask my agent. So any kind of dimensions I can think about where users might, they might ask for long trips or short trips, or trips on a budget, or high, expensive ones, or trips with children or without children. Like, I think of all these different dimensions, and I try to include a variety of different combinations of those in my test cases. And then what I do is I run all of those test cases through my agent, and I see what response I get. So I get some kind of response, which I've not actually shown on this diagram. Those responses, I then look through manually. because only me as a human can decide what is good because this is subjective output. So I look through all the outputs from the agents and I make little notes about whether it's a good response, whether it's a bad response, and if it's a bad response, why is it bad? Was it too short? Was it not formatted correctly? Did it, mistake the intent of the query? I then look at my notes and I try and cluster those into failure modes. And ideally, you are like 5 to 6 different failure modes here. Because if you've got more than that, then it's kind of like too many things to try and fix at once. And if it's too few, if you've only got like one failure mode, then it's not really descriptive enough to tell you where to focus. Having established what the failure modes are, I can then design what is called evals. Yeah, the mystery eval. What is an eval? So, and like in this case, an eval is a test for one of my failure modes. So if that is something you know that's I can test for deterministically, like, so was the answer comprehensive? By which I mean actually, was the answer at least 300 characters? Then my eval can just be code, right? I do not need to do anything fancy for that. And then I can just look at every response I've got. Has it passed that test? Pass or fail? Great. If it's a little bit more subjective, then I'm going to train another LLM, so a secondary LLM, to detect just that failure mode. And that will work because whereas my kind of primary agent that I'm constructing is usually quite kind of like broad in its scope, the eval LLM, it's often called like LLM as a judge, is going to be very, very narrow. So it might say like, hey, is this itinerary broken down day by day? So that's something that's quite difficult to determine deterministically, but very easy and very narrow scope for an LLM to see like, does the itinerary come back day by day? So again, I'm not going to get it to give me like, score this on a 1 to 5 scale because LLMs are very bad at grading things. I'm just going to get it to say like, did it pass? Did it fail? Across all my test cases, then I can say like, okay, the pass rate was 75%, 80%. It's just the percentage of times that the agent passed the eval. And so I can look at these pass rates for different evals, which are then representing these different failure modes. So what that means is I've now got kind of like a benchmark for how well my agent performs against my test cases. If I change the agent, I go and change the system prompts in it, I go and change the data or the tools it's got access to, I can then rerun the test cases, the evals run automatically. And again, I see if my scores have changed. So that is effectively, so then I can have a kind of a quantitative measure of whether my agent has got better or not. And again, if you are thinking about improving anything from a skill or a safe prompt, like right through to a production level agent, this is the process you can go through. For a skill or something like this, a safe prompt, you might only have 2 or 3 test cases, right? And you're not gonna kind of like build out evals like this. You're just gonna create a kind of way to run those test cases really, really easily. And so you can human review the response and see if it's gotten better or not. But the thinking is basically the same. Um, let's have a quick talk about like, so when on that basis, like when do agents make sense and when not? Let me just check the chat. Yeah, so failure modes are exactly, they're kind of like, they are clusters of similar errors that you see. So yeah, like length, answer format, tone, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, and I think Simon, I've answered your question hopefully, right? Where yeah, do you ever use one of them to evaluate the other? Okay, so when do these different kind of types of agents make sense? So agentic workflows, these are really, really powerful for simple internal processes. So things like researching inbound leads, supporting a classification, converting PDFs, into spreadsheet roads, these sorts of things. And ideally, anyone can build these. Like building these is not technically complex. And with quite a small amount of training, yeah, people can build these like quite robustly and use them in lots of different ways. So they're really useful for operations teams, marketing teams, sales teams, product teams to a degree, but product teams often don't have the same sort of repeatable workflows. So There's often more opportunity elsewhere. Agents, on the other hand, these are much more time intensive to build and to test and to get good results out of. As a result, they're generally only useful or only worth building for stuff that you sell to customers. So, as in, like, you're going to sell access to your agent to your customers, or that is like a core internal capability that is going to help you beat your competitors. You're going to build some kind of internal agent and you're going to invest in it because that is going to be like how you win. So, coding agents, as in Lovable is an agent like this, and Lovable sells access to its coding agent to you. Legal agents, dynamic pricing, fraud detection, these sorts of things. Um, these are going to have to be built by technical specialists. That does not mean, someone with a computer science background. It just means someone who is willing to spend the time, um, you know, putting in the time of like actually doing the error analysis, actually designing the evals, actually kind of like rerunning things, because doing that on a repeat basis to get a an agent up to the like really good quality does take time and does require a certain amount of time and maintenance. So I think Dan Shipper was talking about this recently. It's like there are no agents without humans, like because agents require constant supervision and constant tweaking. Okay, so those were agent building platforms. Let's talk about everyone's favorite topic at the moment, Claude Code, and similar agents. Let's not forget Codex and Cursor and all those good things as well. So things you can do with local agents. One of my favorite ones at the moment is prototyping, and not in terms of, oh, I can build a thing that you can go and, I can go and show to customers. No, no, no. Like anything I'm building, I'll pick out like one element of it and I'll be like, yeah, okay, I quite like what you're doing here, but what are some other ways I could do this? Give me four options, mock them up in an HTML page. So this is an example of when I was building different course cards on the Hustle Badger website. And you can see these are, four different ways that it mocked up of how I could display the course cards. Um, and this takes like a minute. And immediately I can be like, oh, great. Well, I like this version, or I like to combine these two versions. Let's use that one and let's move forwards. So this is a really, really fast way of kind of exploring designs and moving things through. And I've used this in loads of different examples. So knowledge work, I think I talked through this example at the start, but they're great at kind of helping you do cool things, or I'm being more straight, helping you with your day-to-day work, regardless of whether you're, even if you're not a coder. Um, Another thing I'm doing increasingly is building little helper tools for myself. So these are tools that only run on my computer. They are not kind of published anywhere on the internet. I do not need to worry about maintenance for anyone else, but they help me get my work done. So because I work a lot in agents, I built my own Markdown editor that works exactly how I want it to. I've also got this little to-do list, which is powered by Claude. So Claude checks it every day. Claude, checks my emails and my call transcripts and makes sure that I haven't forgotten anything. But I can also, drag and drop stuff and check stuff off super nicely. So, kind of things that I've built. Um, Someone was asking earlier about, well, what are the different options here for local agents? Claude Desktop is kind of like, Claude Code is sort of like the most famous at the moment. I'd say like Claude Desktop is really where a lot of people are, as we saw in the chat. Codex, these are sort of like fairly, what's the word, accessible options. You've then got almost all IDEs, so integrated development environments, now incorporate agents, and you can use for non-coding work. So this is where developers write their code. So it's things like Cursor, VS Code, Anti-Gravity. They're probably not right for you if you're not a coder, unless you're doing a lot of coding work, but you can use them. And there are teams using them because they kind of switched over to new tooling before these kind of desktop apps kind of appeared and matured. You can also just go straight into the terminal. If you like feeling like you're working in the matrix and you want to feel like a hacker, this also works, super well. And you can either go straight into terminal or PowerShell, or you can use like a fairly light wrapper like Warp. The difference between like Warp and Cursor is like doesn't feel that big at this point. Um, there is a slight trade-off in terms of how easy these are to use and how much power they have. This is probably sort of overstates the difference in terms of the power differential. Certainly, like on the right hand side here. But basically, I would say for almost anything, go into desktop. And if you have a strong view and you're like, no, people should do X, Y, Z, well, that is a good indication that you already know what you're talking about and you don't need me to recommend you anything. So this is for people who do not have a view on this. I would say like get off the web because the web does not have, in your browser does not give you all the functionality that you want and is not going to allow you to do these kind of automations and skills and shortcuts. That is where you get like dramatic improvements in productivity. But you do not need to go to an IDE or terminal. This is kind of, it's not even overkill. It's just like the wrong option for most people. But also, don't worry too much. If you've got an existing subscription, go where your subscription is. So if you already pay money to OpenAI, just get Codex. If you already pay money to Anthropic, go with Claude. And you can adapt, you can change, switch over. So you don't need to be reviewing these all the time. If you're really worried about it, then review them once every 3 months or something, and see if there are any changes. Um, what can these local agents do? So, why are they better than the web versions? So they live on your computer, which means any file that you are working with, any tool you are using, like they already have access to it. So you don't have to do this kind of constant briefing. You just kind of tell them what you want to do, and they generally already have the briefing. If they don't, you brief them once, you tell them to save it as a file, and then they remember it, forever. So they just learn how you work much, much faster. Um, you can also teach them how to do stuff. So very often I will say like, oh, I want to do this thing, help me do this thing. And at the end of the conversation, when I've actually had Claude help me out, I will then say, great, now save this process as a skill. So then I don't have to lead Claude through that process again. I then just have a skill, which I can call with a keyword, backslash contact lookup, backslash, research, whatever it is. And then Claude effectively treats that as a saved prompt. So it just goes, right, I need to do this. This is the playbook. This is like how Ed likes to do things. And it's super powerful. Um, I think, yeah. So I'm going to do these in the reverse order. So because you've got this harness that runs on your machine, there's quite a lot of the way this works is like you give your request to the harness, and the harness effectively has a conversation with the foundational model. And the foundational model might come back to the harness and ask the harness to do other things like use tools to read or write files or go and do research. What that means is that these tools can run for quite a bit longer before they get back to you. And initially, that can feel like quite painful because you're like, wait a sec, I just asked it to do something, and now it's taking like 3 minutes before it gets back to me. What you learn to do is that actually you kind of like give it a really solid briefing and you delegate a task, and then you go and spin up a separate chat for a different task. So you end up spinning up multiple different chats on multiple different topics. And the limitation there is like how much context switching you can handle as a human. So if I'm having a slow day, I didn't sleep very well, I will just kind of have a slow day and just have one chat and let it take its time. If I'm like full of caffeine, I will have like 3 or 4 different chats going on at the same time and be like working, just switching between them, giving Claude input where it needs it. I'm going to try and wrap this up before the hour, but let's see, not much more to go. Okay, so one thing you're probably seeing quite a lot of on LinkedIn is people talking about personal operating systems or chief of staff or things like this. And this is kind of like a neat way of thinking about how you can get the most out of Claude. What all these things mean basically is you're just using a combination of tools, local files, and skills, though, to help you with your most impactful work. So, as an example here, that to-do list that I work on, the to-do list itself is just a local file in Markdown. So it's just a text file basically that says like, things Ed should do, point one, point two, point three, point four, right? I then have a skill which runs on a schedule. So every day it then kind of goes through and reprioritizes that all the things on that list. But it does that on the basis of it connecting to tools. So it connects to my calendar, my email, my granola notes. So this kind of pattern of doing stuff is really, really powerful for kind of giving you memory, giving you a playbook, and connecting to other places that you do work. And you can do this for basically anything that you're doing. Um, I'd say, sorry, I just want to get back a page here. Like the other thing to kind of talk about here is like if this feels a bit overwhelming, you're just like, wait, tell me more. Where do I start? Like think about things that you do on a regular basis. So think of that like, oh, every week I write a weekly status report. Great. Try and break that down into individual tasks. So what are all the steps that you go through and what is the output of each of those steps? So, well, firstly, I go through all my Jira tickets and I note down like what's been shipped. And then I check all my emails and I see what are the outstanding things that are out of it. Like you probably do a lot of this in almost like shortcuts, but try and articulate it in a kind of really like if you had someone, you were going on holiday, you didn't have a chance to brief someone verbally, you had to write them a kind of like very, very clear to-do list. This is how you would do it. And then you basically think about each of those steps, which of those steps can Claude do for you or can Claude help you with? So that's the kind of another way of thinking about this. Um, Obviously, Claude Code or Claude Desktop coming from Claude Code, being able to code stuff is one of the things it can do too. Um, like I say, you can create web apps, you can create stuff on your computer as well. Um, this is super powerful for non-technical people because it means you can create the tooling that you use yourself, as well as you can create stuff that you want to show to other people. To get started here, don't think of like the tool that you're just burning to use and start building that. Like go and build something really, really basic, for a few minutes just to kind of learn the tools first. So go and build a retro game, go and build a weather app, go and build like a to-do list, and play around with the tool first. Like once you've played around with it and you've got an understanding of it, it's going to be so much easier to go and build stuff. And as I say, like actually once you get going, like it's really a mental barrier rather than a technical one. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up there. Also, because yeah, I've kind of taken a little bit too long. Um, those are the three kind of categories, as we mentioned, that we talked through. So chatbots in the browser, kind of basic Q&A, agent building platforms for building workflows, and then local agents for getting anything done, basically. If you want to go deeper on any of this stuff, check out the videos that we have on our YouTube channel. Follow me on LinkedIn or sign up to one of our courses. We have a whole bunch of courses. We've got dedicated ones on Claude Code and building personal operating systems. We've got ones on prototyping and building AI products. We've got ones on running evals and building agents and all that sort of stuff as well. So do check those out. Okay, I'm just going to check if there are any questions in the chat. If you need to dash off, that's fine. But I'll just check I have answered any questions people have. Okay. Tobit was asking what's my local to-do list hosted on? Yeah, the database of that is just a local markdown file. Gabby is asking, I'd be interested in how I can build my own agent to find and apply for jobs. If you could expand on that, you gave an example at the start. Yeah, I don't know exactly how that was built, but I think what you would think of is firstly, like where is the data coming from? So is there an API that comes off Indeed or LinkedIn or something that allows you to kind of get all the jobs into your own tool? Or is that something where you've got to set up a scraper and that might be something where you get, someone else's scraper that they've built, or you could get Claude to build your own. You're then going to run that scraper on probably a daily basis, like pull in all the jobs you can find and then display them in your own UI. And then again, you're going to think about, okay, is that once you've scraped them, once you've kind of seen the jobs, once you've kind of like created your CV, what is the process for applying for them? Is that something that you do through Claude taking control of your browser and like clicking through LinkedIn, or is that some other way? That's very, very high level how you would do it. Carl talking about any tips on how to manage data privacy. It depends really what your concerns are here. So companies already have lots of policies and processes in place to keep people's data private. And generally, you don't need anything new, right? Yeah, if you're using ChatGPT, then you've already thought about whether you're allowed to send confidential information to a foundational model. Um, one thing you certainly can do, one neat trick you can do is have some kind of anonymizer for data. So if you want to send data to a foundational model for it to analyze it or kind of modify it in some way, what you do is you strip out any confidential information or personal unique identifiers, and you replace them with random identifiers, right? You then send your anonymized data to the foundational model, you get your reply back, and then you de-anonymize it. So, and then the anonymizer, de-anonymizer is just like a kind of mini tool that you build on your own system or on your own computer. So Vihan, kind of following up, like how do you ensure data privacy on Claude Desktop? I guess my question is like, what do you mean by that? What is your concern here? I don't know if you want to come off mute and just talk it through.
Hey, Ed, yeah, can't come on camera, but hey, thanks for having me here. My question was more around your personal data. You obviously give Claude a lot of access if you have them on your personal machine. You know, I don't know, your personal information, say your credentials, your files, your photographs, um, something else. How do you worry about this? And if so, how do you ensure data privacy when dealing with all of these systems on your desktop?
Yeah, I mean, I don't worry about it too much because I sort of feel like all my data is already shared with people everywhere. I kind of assume that all my data is um, you know, going to be a problem. So or yes, I'm sending personal data, quite sensitive data to servers in the US. Um, so in some ways that's not great. In other ways, I'm like, well, but is that any different from any other kind of online activity that I do? Probably not. So could all those chats be hacked or be, you know, read by the US government? I mean, they could be. Um, but I generally think that, it's not, I don't know. I don't worry about it too much, but that's obviously something you need to think about. And I think if you are worried about that sort of thing, then yeah, any data you put into one of these models is being stored on a server somewhere. So you probably shouldn't put, you definitely shouldn't put in like passwords. You shouldn't put in like your social security number. You shouldn't put in like really sensitive data. Um, but yeah, I mean, the more data you give them, the more useful they are. So it's just a trade-off you've got to make personally.
That's true. Thanks, Ed.
Super. Okay. As we're at time, I'm going to finish up there. Thank you, everyone, for coming along. If you do want any more information, drop me a note on LinkedIn or an email. And as I say, we'll follow up with a quick note as well with a recording. Yeah, we'll send the recording out to everyone who registered for this session. Great.